Some children aren't lost out in the world. They're lost inside us. I know that because I was a nurse in the war and had a child I never met. And even now, at 81 years old, there's an invisible cradle swaying inside me every time the silence gets heavy. My name is Evelyn May Turner. I live alone in an old wooden house that creaks when the wind changes direction. My garden is filled with lavender, jasmine, and longing. My knees ache when it rains, and my soul aches when I remember. Before all of this, before the flowers, the neighbors' grandkids who visit sometimes, and the yellowed photos on the shelf, I was a nurse. I served in war zones where death was routine and crying was just background noise. And it was there, between syringes and blood, that my life gave birth to a secret. I'm not one of those who wear medals on their chest. I carry silences, and one of them has been with me for over 6 decades. One no one knows about. One that still sways like a whisper trapped in time. The story I'm about to tell, it's not pretty, but it's real. There are no heroes or villains, just choices, a love without a name, and a child who never called me Mum. If you can give me a few minutes, I'll take you with me. You don't need to have lived through a war, just to have loved something you couldn't keep. And if this story touches even the smallest part of your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who might have lost a piece of themselves in silence too. They say you never forget the first cry. I remember mine. It wasn't when a bomb dropped nearby, or when blood splashed on my cheek for the first time. The cry that stayed with me came from within, silent, muffled, and strangely sweet. It was the cry of something being born inside me. Something that didn't have a name yet. I was way too young when they sent me to that field hospital. I wasn't even 23. But I already knew how to stop bleeding, stitch under pressure, and close the eyes of those who wouldn't be coming back. I learned fast. War doesn't wait for anyone to cry. You just stand up, take a breath, and move on to the next. Like pain was a line you had to get through. Back then I thought being a nurse was just about taking care of others. But war taught me that sometimes we care for others to forget we're bleeding too. I thought I was there to save soldiers. Little did I know that between one stretcher and another, I was losing pieces of myself. Tiny pieces, but final ones. There was this sound that followed me everywhere, the clinking of tools on a metal tray. I heard it even in my sleep. Sometimes I confused it with the sound of my own body. And it was in one of those nights, when sounds blended together, that I felt something different. It was like my womb was screaming, like it was saying, "You're alive. Despite everything, you're still alive." I remember one night in particular. I was sitting in the rest tent, feet swollen, hands stained with iodine. The radio was playing a scratchy jazz tune that felt lost in time. And suddenly, I felt this dull, strange, almost poetic pain, like a seed moving inside me. I put my hand over my belly, instinctively, like someone shielding themselves, or like someone confessing. In that moment, everything went quiet, even with the chaos outside, even with screams of pain, long moans, and footsteps rushing between cots. Right then, inside me, a secret was beginning, one that would grow faster than any wound I'd ever stitched. I didn't know what to think. A nurse getting pregnant during war. It was almost a myth. And I wasn't naive. I knew it could cost me my post, my reputation, my name. But more than that, it could cost me my heart. Because there was no room there to raise anything, only to bury. I started counting the days in silence, like counting sins. Every night, before sleep, I'd touch my belly and wonder if something inside was listening. There was no one I could tell. No one. The other nurses were too tired to notice. And the doctors, well, they only saw as far as the scalpel reached. War made me afraid, sure. But nothing scared me more than that first cry I heard. Muffled, impossible, and all mine. It was like life, stubborn as ever, whispered, "You're not just pain. You can still love." And that, my dear, that was scarier than any bomb. I started avoiding mirrors. My reflection betrayed me, and I already carried enough guilt. Taking care of others while hiding from myself became my routine. I carried bandages, syringes, and a secret. And it kept growing, day by day. Like absences grow when we try not to think about them. The father? He left before he ever knew. A soldier from Alabama, with doubtful eyes and hands that trembled the first time he touched me. We had one night, just one, between two shifts, between two worlds. And after that, his name was crossed off the list and out of my life. I never saw him again. I just remember the way he said my name, like he was saying, "Stay." But no one stays in war. The irony is I always knew how to read vital signs, but I didn't know how to hear my own. I should have asked for help. I should have written a letter. But back then, being a nurse meant being invincible. That's what they expected of me. And I played that role well. Maybe too well. The days that followed were filled with silence. Silence inside me. Outside, it was all noise. People dying, crying, being stitched up like old dolls. But inside, there was a strange calm. Like my body already knew the real war was just beginning. And it had no trenches, no soldiers. Just one woman. A woman with a secret growing in her belly. And a fear too big to fit in her uniform. The only nurse who might have noticed something was Margie. She was older. Her eyes had seen too much. One day she looked at me while I was changing clothes. She simply asked, "You okay, Evelyn?" And me, trembling inside, just said, "I'm tired." She nodded, never mentioned it again. Sometimes I think she knew, and chose to protect me with her silence, like she was saying, "Whatever it is, it's yours alone." And that's how it all began. With a cry no one heard, with a secret born, while the world crumbled around me. I became two people, the nurse who saved lives, and the woman who hid one. And still today, sometimes, when I hear a baby cry in a grocery store, or see a child staring into nothing like they know another world, my body reacts, like something in me is still searching for that first sound. The sound that told me that even in the middle of war, there was still room for love. But I never told anyone. Not him. Not anyone. And time, well, time just let that secret grow along with the wrinkles, the silence, and the longing. Some people think silence is emptiness, but anyone who's lived through war knows silence is full of unspoken names, letters never sent, promises no one ever heard. The silence that came after that first cry, the one I felt inside me, was the heaviest thing I've ever carried. Because, you see, a nurse in the war doesn't get to cry. Crying was a luxury. We wiped our tears with the backs of our hands and kept going. Like a tired soul could be washed clean with hydrogen peroxide. But pregnant in a war zone. That was a secret that couldn't even slip through a glance. My belly was a minefield, and any wrong move could blow everything up. The other nurses, poor things, didn't suspect a thing. They were too busy trying to survive. Helen, for example, slept with a wet cloth over her face so she wouldn't smell the corpses. Marie prayed all the time, even while stitching up wounds. And me, I learned to stay quiet. That was it. Stillness became my greatest defense. War has a cruel way of making the unbearable feel normal. Waking up before the sun, seeing blood like it's just rain. Hearing a boy's name being screamed, knowing tomorrow he won't be there. It all became part of the background. And me, with a secret pulsing under my uniform, had to become even more invisible. I started working night shifts. Said I preferred the calm, but really I was scared someone would notice I was walking differently, that I bent too carefully, that I avoided lifting weight, that my breathing would shift out of nowhere. The truth? I was terrified someone would find out and pull me out of there, that they'd take away the one thing I was still managing to protect. The war camp we were in was a strange mix of hospital and trench, makeshift tents, the smell of ether and rust, voices cutting through the night like blades. And in the middle of it all, my secret, my own private war. There were nights I'd just watch the soldiers sleep, each one with a story cut short. And I'd wonder, will my child be like them? Will he fight? Will he bleed? Will he vanish without a name? I can't really explain why I decided to keep it hidden. Maybe it was fear. Maybe shame. Or maybe instinct. War turns you wild. And love, well, love that begins in secret needs thick silence to survive. It wasn't the time to think about babies. Not there. Not with bombs sketching the sky. But even if I didn't think, I felt. And how I felt. When I'd pass a local child running through the rubble, my chest would tighten. When I saw a baby in a refugee woman's arms, my eyes would tremble. It was like the world was mocking me, giving me glimpses of what I couldn't have. The letters that came from the field post only made things worse. The nurses read news from home, from boyfriends, from brothers. I pretended mine never arrived. But truth is, I never wrote. There was no one to write to. And even if there was, how would I explain that a life was growing inside me in total silence? Time passed the way rain does, leaving everything damp and blurry. And my body started to change. Nothing too obvious. But I knew. I felt it in my clothes, in how I stood, in how I slept. Sometimes I'd dream of a cry that wasn't pain, a cry from someone searching for me, lost between the tents. I'd wake up with my hand over my belly, like saying, "It's okay. I'm still here." Margie, that older nurse I mentioned, started looking at me differently. She never said a word, but I noticed. Her eyes weighed on me. She had a way of caring for us that hurt. She knew too much, and said too little. One day, while we were stitching a deep wound on an 18-year-old boy, she whispered, "Have you ever thought about having kids?" And I swallowed hard, said no, said it wasn't for me, that the war had already taken everything. She didn't reply, just handed me the scissors. But that look, it stayed with me. I started writing in a little hidden notebook. Tiny things, loose words. "If you're born with my eyes, I hope you see less pain." Or, "I felt you move today, just for a moment." But it was real. It was the only way I could talk about him. Writing became my valve, my hiding place, my comfort. But with each passing day, the fear grew too. Fear of bleeding in front of someone, fear of fainting mid-treatment, fear of giving birth under fire. I imagined 1,000 scenarios, and none of them were safe. Some nights I'd wonder if he could hear the bombs from inside, if that tiny heart already knew what the world was like. The hardest part, though, was pretending everything was normal, smiling, joking, comforting mothers who got letters saying their sons had fallen. How do you comfort someone when you're carrying your own grief in advance? The guilt ate me alive like a fever. I was a nurse. I was supposed to care. But who was caring for me? One September morning, I woke up with a sharp pain, crawled to the nursing station, and laid behind the supply tent. I stayed there for hours, holding the pain, thinking maybe it was the beginning or the end, or both. But it passed, and with it went the certainty that silence was all I had, all that was keeping me whole. Because in war, sometimes love has to go quiet to survive. And what I felt for that baby, that faceless secret, was so strong, so fierce, it could only exist in silence. And that's how I made it. Not as a woman, but as a secret with a name yet to come, and a fate still unknown. His name was Thomas, and I never said it out loud, not even in my dreams, not even when I wrote, because there was something sacred about that memory, something that only made sense if it stayed quiet, like a flower that blooms in the dark. Thomas wasn't any different from the other soldiers. He came into the hospital with a scraped-up shoulder, a mud-stained uniform, and a frightened soul. He was 23, with a southern accent that bent every word at the end, like he was apologizing just for being alive. I was the nurse who treated him during intake. And that's where our little war began. There were no promises, no plans, just a moment. A single moment when our eyes met in the middle of chaos, and something unmeasurable lit up between us. Maybe it was loneliness, maybe hope, or maybe just the desperation of needing to feel anything other than fear. The night it all happened wasn't romantic. There was light rain hitting the canvas of the tent, the scent of alcohol, metal, and urgency. I took off my apron. He took off his uniform. We touched each other like drowning souls clinging to driftwood. No one smiled. No one spoke. And yet, everything was said. I remember how he trembled, like his body already knew there wouldn't be time, that this was it. I wanted to say something after. Anything. But he had already fallen asleep, and by morning, he was called back out. He didn't even say goodbye, just gave me a quick glance, like his eyes were saying, "Thank you." I never saw him again. For weeks I wondered if he knew, if he noticed something in the way I walked, in my lack of appetite, in my absences. But the truth is, he never had the chance. War doesn't give room for suspicion. It sweeps away bodies before hearts can catch up to what they're feeling. And even if he had noticed, what could he have done? Back then, a nurse and a soldier couldn't just have a child, especially not a black woman and a white man. War was ruthless, but so was the world beyond it. I knew what would happen if that pregnancy came to light. I'd be dismissed, sent home in disgrace, my reputation ruined, maybe never allowed to wear a uniform again, never called nurse again. But it wasn't just fear. It was instinct. It was protection. Maybe I sensed from the start that this child, this secret, could only survive in the dark, because the world still wasn't good enough to welcome him. In the rest tent, I used to picture his face in my mind. Thomas's face, the baby's face. I mixed the two. Tried to guess what the eyes would look like. If they'd have my skin or his. If he'd have long fingers, the dimple in the chin, that way of furrowing his brow when he focused. Each time I imagined it, the love grew. But so did a strange kind of ache. The ache of an absence I hadn't even lived yet. Because deep down, I knew. That child would never know me. And Thomas would never know him. One night I wrote a letter, addressed it to him, though I had no idea where to send it. "Dear Thomas," I began. "Something bloomed in me after you left. A sound, a heartbeat, a seed. I wrote everything I felt, everything I feared, everything I dreamed. And when I finished, I burned the letter. Not out of shame, but survival. Because back then too many words could kill a woman. After that, I stopped writing about him. But I never stopped thinking. Sometimes, on very quiet days, I'd wonder if Thomas was still alive, if he'd made it home, if he'd married, had kids, forgotten about the dark-eyed nurse who once stitched up his shoulder with shaking hands. And other times I imagined he'd dreamed of me, that somewhere out there, a man felt the absence of something. Without knowing what, one day Marie, the one who prayed all the time, came and said a soldier named Thomas had died. She said it in passing, not knowing the weight of the name. I froze, felt the world tilt just a little. I didn't cry. I just went quiet. Silence is the mourning of those who don't have the right to grieve in public. Was it the same Thomas? I never knew. I never dared ask. I preferred to keep the doubt alive. Because sometimes, doubt comforts more than truth. And so I went on, as if that moment had never happened, as if I had never loved for one night, as if my womb had never held a piece of him. Because that's what war demanded. It demanded we pretend, that we swallow everything. Pain, blood, longing. Even a child. Deep down I kept it all to protect them both. To protect Thomas. From a responsibility he might not have wanted. And to protect my son. From a world that wouldn't know how to love him. But keeping secrets comes at a price. And the price I paid was never hearing my name spoken by him. Not by one. Not by the other. And to this day, when someone calls me Miss Evelyn, I hear a different tone in the echo. An imagined tone. One that never existed outside my head. A mommy that only lives in thought. The first time I bled, it was on the inside. I don't mean my body. I mean my soul. It was during the 3rd month. I couldn't sleep on my side anymore, and the morning nausea came like a whisper, disguised with lukewarm coffee and a cold cloth on my neck. But the real pain was something else. It was hiding what had already become impossible to silence inside me. Being a nurse in the war meant being a wall, unshakable, no cracks. But I was already crumbling, a secret growing inside me and no trench to hide in. With every step, every bandage, every soldier who looked into my eyes begging for help, I bled, because I could no longer pretend my body was neutral. It was now occupied territory, by a life I didn't know how to save. I learned how to bleed quietly. The bleeding started subtle, a rust-colored streak in the early morning hours while I changed the sheets of a feverish patient. It felt like a whisper. You're not in control. I froze for a few seconds. The world spinning, sounds muffled, and me completely still. It wasn't pain. It was a message, like my body saying, "Remember, you're human." I hid the stained sheet, washed my hands twice, forced a smile for the next nurse who came in. No one noticed, but inside I knew. My inner war was starting, one no morphine could soothe. I kept working, more carefully now. I started kneeling slower, avoiding heavy loads. I covered the nausea with mint lozenges and blamed exhaustion when my pale skin gave me away. But the worst part was the constant fear of failure. What if I fainted in the middle of surgery? What if I lost the baby right there, in front of everyone? There wasn't a single doctor I could trust. Telling the truth would mean exile, maybe even scandal. A black nurse, pregnant, unmarried, in the middle of a war zone. What would they say? That I was reckless, immoral, a disgrace. I'd stop being seen as a caregiver and start being seen as shame, as a distraction, as a liability, and worst of all, as a woman. Margie began watching me with those soft, knowing eyes. She'd offer me chamomile tea without saying why, leave clean socks on my bunk. Sometimes she'd gently touch my shoulder and say, "You're doing fine." I never replied. because if I said a single word, everything would crumble. She knew, and chose to love me in silence. One day, in the supply tent, I found bloodied gauze. Not mine, from another woman. And I wondered, how many others were bleeding quietly? How many nurses had to pretend to be stone while they were fertile and aching inside? War didn't let us be mothers. It barely let us be human. I remember one day that was especially cruel. A 17-year-old boy arrived with his abdomen torn open by shrapnel. His screams still echoed deep in my ears. I held his hands while the doctors did their best. He called me Mama before he slipped away. And I almost answered. I almost said, Son. But I stayed quiet, because the child I carried wasn't there. He was hidden, protected, buried under layers of silence. That night the pain was so intense I thought I'd lose him. I cried in the latrine, bit down on a towel so no one would hear me. And I prayed, for the first time in years. I begged that if he had to go, let it be quick. Let it be painless. But he stayed, strong, stubborn, as if he were saying, not yet. I started wearing a looser belt, folding my apron to hide the swelling. I avoided mirrors because every time I saw my silhouette, it felt like looking at a sin. Not because loving was wrong, but because in that world, loving was far too dangerous. And I loved that little, nameless being. Loved him with fear, with guilt, with everything I couldn't say. One day, Margie left a note in the pocket of my coat. It read, "Every woman carries a war inside her. Some win, others survive." I read it and cried, because in that moment I knew I wasn't alone, not completely. Every night I'd write one line for the baby. Simple things. "It hurt a bit today. You moved today. I thought about calling you Samuel." Then I'd tear up the paper. But writing kept me alive. Reminded me I was still more than bandages and scalpels. I was shelter. There was one day when, for a few minutes, I felt like I was bleeding too much. Fear froze me. I thought I was losing him. I sat behind the tent, took a deep breath, and for the first time, spoke to God out loud. Whatever happens, take care of him. And then came silence. And within that silence, a tiny movement, like a sign. Like he was saying, "I'm still here, Mama." In that moment, I understood what real resistance was. Not the kind in trenches, but the resistance of continuing to love in secret, of still being a nurse, even when my body begged for rest, of still smiling, even while bleeding on the inside. From then on, I made a pact, a silent one, that I wouldn't let the war take this from me, too. I had already lost friends. I had seen men torn apart. I had seen hope spat out onto dirt floors. But I wouldn't lose my child, even if it was only inside me, even if he never knew. And so, I carried on. A nurse who bled in secret, healing others with trembling hands, while a tiny, stubborn life healed me from within, without even knowing it. Everything I have of him fits in a small suitcase, one of those dark leather ones with an old metal clasp and a smell that's half mildew, half dried lavender. Inside there are only 3 things: a folded letter, a blue blanket with frayed edges, and a name. A name that wasn't his, but the best I could come up with at the time. I knew the moment would come. I couldn't hide it anymore. My belly no longer fit inside the aprons. My wrists were swollen, my breathing heavy with effort. And more than anything, my soul was screaming. The war outside was still merciless, but the war inside me, the one I'd been fighting alone, was reaching its climax. And I had to decide, what do I do with this life growing without permission? Margie was the one who found the solution. She didn't say it in words. Nurses knew how to speak with their eyes. One night she called me over with a quick nod, took me to the back of the field hospital, to an old abandoned supply tent. Inside there was a little corner with blankets, an oil lamp, and silence. So much silence. "When it's time. Come here," she whispered. Then she left, placing the lantern in my hand. And the time came. It was during a storm, like the sky was trying to give birth to something too. Lightning flashed against the canvas, and the ground shook with every clap of thunder. I felt the first pains low, like deep tickles, and then they turned sharp, into waves, into knives. With each contraction, an entire world passed through me. I went to the tent alone. No one saw me. No one could. I took a towel, a scarf, and what little faith I had left. Margie showed up later, with a bucket of warm water and steady hands. She didn't speak. She just moved, like someone who'd done this before. Like someone who had helped other women bring into the world what the world couldn't ever know. I didn't scream. I bit down on the sheet. I prayed in silence. And after hours that felt like centuries, I heard it. A cry. Soft, raspy, and so human it shook me to my core. A cry that wasn't from war or pain. It was a beginning. It was life. When I saw his little face, something inside me shattered and came back together all at once. He was tiny, so tiny. Reddish skin, half-closed eyes. His hands moved slowly, like he didn't yet know he could touch the world. And me. I wanted to hold him forever, but I knew I couldn't. Margie wrapped him in the blue blanket. "Do you want to give him a name?" she asked. And I did. I really did. But the real name, the one I felt in my heart, was Thomas, and I couldn't call him that. It was dangerous, too intimate, a secret inside a secret. So I made one up. "Benjamin," I said. I don't know why. Maybe because it sounded strong. Maybe because that night, I wanted to believe he'd have a chance. Benjamin Turner. A clean name, a new name. A name that could go on without me. The letter, I wrote it that same night. While he slept wrapped in the blanket, I sat on the packed dirt floor and wrote. Just one candle lit, rain tapping on the tent. I wrote with trembling hands. "If you ever read this, Benjamin, know that I was a nurse in the war, and that I loved you from the first moment. That I didn't leave you out of weakness, but out of courage. That the world outside was cruel, and all I wanted was to protect you. I wrote until the candle went out. Then I folded the paper, tied it with string, and placed it inside the suitcase, beside the blanket, beside my own soul. Because that's what I left in there, a piece of me that would never come back. The next morning the plan went into motion. Margie contacted a friend who worked in civilian transport. There was a woman, also a nurse, who couldn't have children. She lived in a nearby town, quiet, Christian, kind-hearted. And it was to her that little Benjamin was taken. I didn't go to the road. I didn't say goodbye. I stayed in the tent, lying down, bleeding, eyes fixed on the stained canvas above me, listening to the truck drive away. Every meter was another part of me leaving. After that, I kept working. No one knew. Not Helen, not Marie. No one. Only Margie, who started looking at me like someone guarding a grave, but also like someone watering a seed. Our secret was a forbidden flower. The suitcase stayed with me. I brought it home months later. No one opened it. No one was interested. Just another old suitcase among many. But to me, it was sacred. And the name, the made-up name, Benjamin. I never wrote it again, never said it aloud. But every time I see a young man with searching eyes, small hands, that quiet look of someone who doesn't quite know where they came from, I think, Could it be? Could it be him? And then I go back to the suitcase, open it slowly, touch the blanket, read the letter, and close it again. Because some things can't be undone, only kept, as if keeping them was, in a way, still loving. Coming back from war is a poorly conjugated verb, because no one returns the same. Some parts of us stay behind. I came back with a suitcase in my hand and an emptiness in my belly. I came back with a more curved spine, a heavier heart, and a folded letter no one ever read. When I arrived back in the United States, no one was waiting for me. My family wasn't the type to write letters or throw welcome home gatherings, and I hadn't exactly given them reasons to. I grew up in a house where silence was law and love was rationed. My father had already passed. My mother lived with my younger sister who had her own kids, her own life. I was the one who went off to war. The one who wore white, cared for strangers, and came back with eyes full of secrets. I didn't tell anyone. There was no way to tell, no room, no language. What I lived through didn't fit into quick kitchen conversations. When my mother asked if I'd seen a lot of ugly things, I just nodded. And when she said I looked thinner, that my eyes seemed far away, I smiled, as if it were a compliment. I barely slept. I'd wake up to sirens that weren't really there. I had dreams of small hands reaching for me in the dark. At breakfast, my mother served toast with butter and asked if I had plans. "You going back to the hospital?" I said yes, but inside, I could only think about the suitcase. It was under my bed, locked with a key I wore on a string around my neck. No one would open it. It was my private tomb. I started working at a small local clinic. It wasn't war, but there was still pain, and that, in a way, kept me going. Healing wounds gave me the illusion that I could still fix things, even if not my own. With every stitch I made, every patient I treated, it felt like I was paying a silent penance, as if I was saying, "Forgive me. I wasn't strong enough to keep him." My sister got pregnant not long after I returned. It was a boy. I went with her to the hospital as her support. And when the baby was born, chubby, crying loud, hands wide open, something in me collapsed. My knees buckled. I ran to the bathroom, cried until my face was gone. It felt like seeing, just for a moment, what could have been, what would never be. My family never understood my quietness. They said I was too withdrawn, that I should get married, start a family, have kids. But what no one knew was that I already had all that, and lost it. I wasn't empty. I was too full. Full of a secret that didn't fit into everyday words. Time went on, as it always does, without asking permission. The years folded like sheets in a closet. I watched my mother get sick and die, watched my nephews and nieces grow, watched old war friends age, marry, die too. But him, my Benjamin, never came back, never sent a letter, never looked for me. And how could he? He didn't know. Sometimes I wondered if he was okay, if he was loved, if he laughed on birthdays, got toys, cried on his first day of school. I dreamed of him playing piano, running through trees, falling and asking to be held. But the cruelest part was not knowing if he was even alive, not knowing if he breathed, if he was sick, if he had passed, like so many others had. On quiet afternoons, I'd sit on the porch with the suitcase on my lap. Sometimes I'd open it, breathe in the scent of the blanket, read the letter again. A part of me hoped that someday he'd come, knock on my door, say something like, "Someone told me about you." But that never happened. Once in my early 50s, I went to the town where Margie said the woman who adopted him lived. It was far. I took an old bus, walked narrow streets, sat on a park bench for hours, scanned faces, looking without knowing what for. And then I left, because I realized I wouldn't recognize him, and he wouldn't recognize me. And maybe that was even worse. I never told anyone, never searched for records. Fear of knowing, fear of finding out he didn't want to know, that he found out and chose not to come. Or worse, that he never knew, and died never knowing he was someone's son. Fear of looking in the mirror and seeing that silence didn't protect anyone. It only pushed them away. But even so, I never regretted it, because I didn't abandon him. I saved him. If I had kept him, if I had told, he might have been labeled, maybe rejected, maybe taken from me. Maybe he would have grown up in the shadow of scandal. This way, he had a chance, a story, a clean life, and even without me, he was loved. I like to believe that. Coming back from the war without him was the greatest emptiness of my life. But it was also the greatest act of love I ever committed. Because sometimes love means staying, and sometimes it means leaving. And I left. But I left behind a suitcase, a blanket, a letter, and a name that maybe no one will ever say. But that, inside me, still calls to me. After the war, my work didn't end. I kept being a nurse, not because it was my calling, but because it was the only way I knew how to survive among others without being noticed by myself. Being a nurse gave me a script, a uniform, an excuse. As long as I was caring for others, no one asked who was caring for me. And that's how I spent most of my life, caring for children who weren't my son. I worked over 20 years in the pediatric wing of a public hospital in Atlanta. The place was loud, forcibly cheerful, with walls painted blue and orange, as if you could cover pain with color. And there, among shy giggles, broken toys, and fevered cries, I saw faces, tiny faces. Some looked so much like the one I imagined for my Benjamin. It was like living in a reverse dream. Because every child I held in my arms, every boy who called me Miss Evelyn with a raspy voice, I felt there was one missing. Mine. The one who never called me anything. Not Mom, not Ma'am. Nothing. I got attached too easily. That was my flaw. Or my weakness. Maybe my penance. My co-workers said I had a way with kids. That my touch calmed them. That my voice felt like warm tea for the soul. And maybe that was true. But it wasn't talent. It was absence. Because I treated every child like they might be him. Like deep down, part of me hoped one of them would look into my eyes and say, "It's you. I know you." It never happened, but there were moments. Moments so deep they hurt, like little André, who stayed in the hospital almost a month with severe pneumonia. He had sunken eyes and curly hair like his father, who never showed up. I rocked him through long night shifts, humming softly, his head on my chest, as if I was trying to heal in him what I never managed to heal in me. Or little Rebecca, who gave me a drawing of a woman in an apron holding a child, saying, "It's you with me." I smiled. I kept the drawing. But I cried in the locker room, hidden. Because that was the image I never had, the lap I never truly offered. The other nurses thought it was sweet. They said I was motherly. But they didn't know what it was made of. They didn't know that behind my care was a guilt that never left. Because no matter how much love we give to other people's children, our silence still lives in a room no one sees. I tried to distract myself with time. Took classes, read cheap novels, started going to church more often. But every baptism, every little birthday party, every lost child in a grocery store who called me Mom by mistake, it was all a reminder that there was a child in the world who might be looking for me, or forgetting me, One time, a young man showed up at the hospital, holding his newborn. His wife was in labor. He was nervous, pale, hands trembling. I walked up to him, took the baby gently, and said, "It's going to be okay." He looked at me, and for a second, just a second, I swear, I saw something. A flicker, a recognition that never finished. But it vanished as quickly as it came. It wasn't him. It couldn't be. But my heart beat like it was. I never searched for my son. Not out of fear, but because sometimes love is stronger in silence. I imagined him well, with a kind mother, a good home, a life unlike mine. No war, no guilt, no locked suitcase. That's all I wanted for him. Peace, even if it meant being far from me. And so, I cared. I cared for other people's children like someone watering someone else's garden with hope. I bathed them, changed bandages, told stories. Sometimes I'd say, "You are so loved, you know." And they'd smile, nod. They had no idea the weight of that phrase for me, because it's what I wanted to say to my son. What I still want to believe, that he was loved, that he felt it, that the only thing missing was me. The hospital became my home, my altar, my penance. There was a locker in the staff room where I hid the suitcase, the same one, the dark leather, with the blanket and the letter. I kept it at the top, wrapped in a plastic bag. No one ever saw it. But it was there, always there, like a shrine of memory and confession. On rainy days, I felt everything more deeply. The memories hit harder. The war, the makeshift tent, the muffled cries of birth, the sound of the truck driving away with him. Rain always made me bleed inside. In my final years of service, I was transferred to pediatric palliative care. That's where pain hides in quiet places. Children nearing the end. Eyes that knew too much. Questions that hurt. "Do you believe in heaven, Nurse Evelyn?" They'd ask me. And I'd answer softly, "I believe in reunions." Maybe that's what keeps me going. The thought that when this life ends, heaven will give me a reunion. Just one. One look. One touch. One hug that's been hanging in time for decades. I don't need much. Just to know he lived. That he smiled. That he didn't hate me. And until then, I keep going. With all the children who aren't him. With all the hands I hold for a moment. With all the eyes I search and don't find. But I keep going. Because being a nurse taught me this. That even while bleeding, we can still care. And that love, even silent, even distant, even hidden, still heals. It was on an autumn Sunday. I remember because the leaves were falling gently on the front sidewalk, and the kitchen radio played softly while I made tea. One of those morning shows with cheerful voices that always sound too happy for the kind of sorrow I carried in my body. And then, I heard it. We're here today with Benjamin Turner, director of the new community clinic in South Central, doing incredible work with at-risk children. My body froze. Benjamin Turner. It felt like time stopped, like, for a second, all the sounds in the world disappeared, and all that remained was that name echoing in my head. I know it's a common name. Benjamin is straight out of the Bible. Turner could belong to anyone. But still, I knew that name wasn't just any name. It was mine. It was his. The teacup slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. But I didn't move. The radio kept going. The interview continued. And his voice, young, steady, kind. He spoke clearly, explaining the clinic, the programs for children, about offering opportunity where there had only been neglect. And all I could think was, "Did you get that from me?" I sat down slowly, grabbed a sheet of paper and a pen, wrote the name, Benjamin Turner, as if I needed a reminder, as if that name wasn't already tattooed in my blood. In the days that followed, I started searching, quietly. I went to the library, asked one of the young interns to help me use the computer, told her I was looking up an old student. And there, with my hands sweating over the keyboard, I typed, Benjamin Turner, plus clinic, plus Atlanta. It popped up, a small photo but clear. A man in his 40s, light brown skin, neatly trimmed hair, determined eyes. There was something in his gaze, something of mine, or something I wanted to see. He stood beside smiling children. There was something gentle in the way he rested his hand on one of their shoulders. I read everything I could. Interviews, articles, a glowing resume. Trained in nursing, then in medicine, specialized in pediatrics, worked with refugees, created a mental health support program for orphaned children. My heart beat like a drum. It was him. I felt it. But how could I know? Margie once told me there are secrets that don't need proof, that our body knows what our mind doubts. And in that moment, my whole body was shouting, "It's him." But what if it wasn't? I went home with my head spinning. Sat on the porch, pulled a blanket over my legs and stayed there until dark, thinking about how life moves in strange circles, how the word nurse had led me back to him, as if, despite time, choices, and distance, our thread was still there, silent, invisible, but unbroken. I could reach out, just call the clinic, make an appointment, show up, say, "I'm Evelyn. I was a nurse in the war. And you were born from me." But what if he didn't believe me? What if he didn't want to know? What if he had his own story? Another mother, another love, other truths. What hurts more than absence is rejection. And I don't know if I could survive it. For weeks that name echoed in my mind. Benjamin Turner. Every time I passed a child on the street, I pictured him as a little boy. Every time I treated a patient, I wondered if he did the same. If he used his hands gently, spoke softly, looked people in the eye. If, somehow, something in me had survived in him. I even started writing a new letter. "Dear Benjamin," I began. But I stopped there, because I didn't know what came next, because anything I said might feel like an intrusion. How do you explain decades of silence? How do you justify a suitcase, a blanket, an old letter, and a made-up name? And what if he already knew? What if, deep down, he knew, and had been waiting? Or what if he never wanted to know? The days passed, the name stayed, and I carried on with my routine. The garden, the hospital, the quiet prayers before bed, but all of it tinted by that doubt, that aching hope. One afternoon I went to the clinic, from afar, just to see. It was a simple building with wide windows and plants on the sills, children's drawings taped to the walls. A sign said, "Here, everyone matters." I leaned against the low wall and watched, and then I saw him. For real, not in a picture, but there, walking from his car to the door. White shirt, folders in hand, confident steps. My heart jumped. I wanted to call out, wanted to shout, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, watching him go inside, disappear among the children, like a living memory I was never allowed to touch. I walked away in silence. There was nothing to be done. Or maybe everything. A few days later I took the original letter, the one from the suitcase, and placed it inside a new envelope. Addressed it to the clinic. No return address. I just wrote, "For Dr. Benjamin Turner, from someone who saw you before anyone else did." And I dropped it in the mailbox. I never knew if it got there. I never knew if he read it. But deep down, maybe it didn't matter, because on that Sunday, When I heard his name on the radio, something inside me settled, as if to say, he's okay, and that's enough. Or almost. There's an absence heavier than any presence, not hearing your own name spoken by the one you gave life to. And I, Evelyn May Turner, have been called many things in this life. Miss, ma'am, nurse, sister, neighbor. But never have I been called mother. Not by him. And that, my dear, is the kind of silence that stitches a scar deep inside you. One you can't see, but that burns with every birthday, every Mother's Day, every hospital visit. I'd smile when people praised how I cared for children and say, "Thank you. I do what I can." But what I wanted to say was, I do it for one who never knew he was mine. I dreamed of him. I dreamed of the first word I never heard, the first step I never clapped for, the first scraped knee I never got to bandage. And in the dream, sometimes he called me Mom, Mommy. And just hearing that, even in sleep, I'd wake up with a wet face, because in that word lived everything I'd lost. Once I saw a child in the park call out, "Mommy," while running toward a woman holding an ice cream cone. That moment, so simple, so ordinary, pierced me like an arrow. Not because of the gesture, but because of the sound. That sound that never reached me. That title I never carried, though it belonged to me by right and by ache. They say being a mother means raising, being present, caring. But what if the only way to care was to let go? That question haunted me for decades. Because the love I had for Benjamin didn't die with the birth, or the goodbye, or the years. It simply hid, like an ember glowing beneath the ashes, a flame that never goes out, a silent hope. For years I wrote letters I never sent. Each one began the same. "Dear son, you may not know who I am, but I know who you are." Then came everything I wanted to tell him, about the war, the tent, the suitcase, the choice. I told him how he cried softly and curled up as he slept, like he already knew the world was too big, that I wrapped him in a blue blanket and wrote his name with fear, but also with love, and that even from afar, he was mine, even in secret. He was mine. Those letters are still here, folded with care, some stained with coffee, others with tears, and every single one ends the same way. If one day you hear your name, and it sounds too familiar, maybe it's my heart calling you. But he never answered. And how could he? Benjamin grew up with another family, had another mother, maybe another last name, other memories, other stories. He never came looking for me. And honestly, I never expected he would, because I left no trail, because the love I had was the kind that protects, even at the cost of being forgotten. There was a time I thought about telling someone, a nephew, a friend, the church pastor. But every time the truth reached my lips, my throat would close. Like the secret knew it wasn't time yet, or maybe never would be. And deep down, I think some secrets aren't meant to be spoken, but felt. One spring morning years ago, I sat on the porch with the suitcase in my lap and thought about burning everything. The letter, the blanket, the memories. I thought maybe it would set me free. But when I opened the suitcase, I couldn't. I touched the worn fabric, reread the folded letter, and realized that was all I had of him. Erasing it wouldn't bring relief. It would just erase the only proof that he existed to me. So I left it as it was. And since then, I've lived like this, with a identity no one gave me. A mother in secret, a mother in silence, a mother to a son who never called me Mom. But I called him, every night, every time I closed my eyes and pictured his face. Every time I saw a child smile and thought, does he smile like that too? Every time I heard a name that sounded close and my heart skipped a beat. Because to me, oh, he always had a name. Always had a face. Always had a place. Even without knowing. And if he ever found me, I wouldn't ask for apologies or hugs. I'd just want to look him in the eyes and say, I loved you the best I could. From far away. In silence. Forgotten. And if he asked why I never came for him, I'd say, because love doesn't always show itself. Because sometimes love is so big, it chooses not to be found. Benjamin, if one day you feel a hollow space you can't explain, know that it has a name. It's the echo of my love for you. And even if you never call me Mom, I called you son. Silently. Every day of my life, every nurse wears a uniform. But some of us wear more than what's visible. I, for one, have always worn my silence as part of my apron. While tying the straps behind my back, tucking my hair under the cap, swallowing pain with tap water. The silence was already there. Like invisible fabric. Like armor. Like inheritance. Over the years, my apron carried everything. Blood, vomit, spilled coffee, the scent of antiseptic and baby powder. But what stuck to it the most was absence. Because every day as I slipped it on, it was like telling myself, today too, no one will know. That silence became part of me. Not the kind that suffocates, but the kind that protects. A fertile, ancestral silence, like the kind worn by the women who came before. Women who were forced to love without witnesses. Like the black women who cared for other people's children while burying their own dreams deep inside. A silence that wasn't cowardice, but resistance. I never said goodbye to it. Unlike many women who hang up their uniforms when they retire, I kept mine. It still hangs in the back of my closet. The collar is worn, the sleeves faded, but it still carries the scent of all that was never spoken. Of the birth no one saw. Of the child no one knew. Of the war that passed through me, inside and out. There were times I thought I would tell, that I would choose someone, anyone, to finally share the weight. But every time the silence threatened to break, something in me would cry out, not yet. Maybe out of fear. Maybe out of loyalty to something greater. Because holding that secret became a way to protect that moment, too. That one moment when I was whole. Woman. Mother. Warrior. Being a nurse taught me that there are pains no medicine can reach. Only care. Only presence. And my silence was exactly that. Continuous presence. The quietest, most faithful form of love I knew how to offer. I wasn't a mother with arms. I was a mother in absence. And there is tenderness in that too, though no one teaches you that in textbooks. I was young when it all began. Now I'm old. My knees ache. My hands tremble. My memory sometimes betrays me. But one thing has never faded. The sound of that cry. The first one. The only one. That soft, tired cry that echoed inside that canvas tent. That sound lives in me. Like a whispered prayer. When I look at younger women, I see cracked mirrors of my younger self. I see rushed nurses, eyes sunken, trying to save the world without realizing their own bodies are crying out for help. Sometimes I want to say, take care of the part no one sees. But I don't, because they need to discover it on their own. Just like I did. Not long ago, I met a young nurse who told me she chose this profession because of a doctor who inspired her. She spoke with such excitement, such admiration. And something in me lit up. I asked the name of the doctor. Dr. Benjamin Turner, she said. He's incredible. I stayed silent. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just thanked her and went on my way. That's how silence works. It doesn't need a stage or an audience. Just a name said in passing. an unintentional memory, a folded apron, and it fulfills its purpose. Silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of soul. And that's what I've worn all these years, a silence with soul. A love that never introduced itself, a son who never called me, and a war that never truly ended. Maybe one day someone will find this letter. Maybe they'll read my words and recognize something, a detail, a story, a strange sense of belonging. Maybe that someone will be him. Maybe not. But what matters is that now, this silence is dressed in words, stitched onto this paper, line by line, the way I stitched so many wounds, so many bandages, so many days of longing. Because the time has come. Time to hang up the apron for good. Time to let the silence rest. But first I needed to write. First I needed someone to know. These days, almost everything I own fits inside a drawer. Socks, floral scarves, envelopes with the names of hard-to-pronounce medications. And at the very bottom, that old suitcase, that one, the dark leather, worn clasp, scent of time standing still. I don't open it much anymore, but I know it's there. I know the blue blanket is still folded the same way, as if it's still waiting for arms. Or maybe, as if the arms were always him. The last time I touched that fabric, I had the clear sensation that my body still remembered the weight of the newborn I held for minutes, and loved for a lifetime. Some women have framed pictures on the shelf. Others have diplomas, letters, birth certificates. I have a suitcase, a folded letter, a name I barely ever spoke out loud, and a silence that never left me. Do I regret it? No. Because regret is what you feel when you act without love. But I loved so deeply, so silently, so fully, that what remained wasn't guilt. It was grief. Grief for a presence that never took shape. Grief for a title I never wore. Grief for the nurse I was, and the mother I tried to be without witnesses. War taught me many things. How to stitch torn flesh, how to stay calm in the face of death, how to recognize the scent of fear. But no one taught me how to handle the kind of love with no recipient. The kind that has to be hidden, silenced, tucked away like a forbidden weapon. Today, at 81 years old, I no longer expect someone to ring my doorbell and say, "I'm the one you were waiting for." No. I've come to understand that some stories aren't completed out in the world. They complete themselves inside us, like a scar that closes in silence. But if one day, even if only in a dream, he looks me in the eyes and says, "Are you my mother?" I'll know how to answer, not with words, but with an outstretched hand, with the touch of someone who cared without being seen, with the gesture of someone who, despite everything, never stopped loving. And if he never comes, that's okay too, because now this story isn't alone anymore. Now it's been told. Now it exists outside of me. Now it can be felt by other women, who also held their children in silence. If you've listened to me this far, I thank you with my whole heart, because sometimes all we need is to be heard. And if this story touched your heart, even just a quiet corner of it, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might be carrying an old silence too. Maybe this story is what she needed to hear. Maybe, deep down, it's what you needed to remember. Thank you for letting me open that drawer. Now, I can close it in peace.